Hey, what's up, everybody? Sentient by Jackie Higgins. Jackie Higgins is a zoologist. She's involved with directing and producing science films for Oxford, National Geographic, PBS Nova, BBC Science, and the Discovery Channel. And Sentient is her first book. I had never heard of this book before. I saw it in the bookstore and I thought it looked pretty good. Actually, I thought it looked like Ed Yong's An Immense World, which I loved, and I reviewed it on this channel. So if you haven't seen my review for An Immense World, check that out too. It was one of the best books I read last year. So it turns out that Sentient was pretty similar to An Immense World, but Sentient actually came out before An Immense World did. So the idea of this book is to look at some of the more strange and powerful senses in the animal world and discuss where humans lie with each of these senses. She talks about cases where humans experience deficits as well as heightened senses. This book makes many references to Oliver Sacks's book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The book explores the neurological side of sensation and perception with a focus on what deficits or neurological problems can show us about our senses. I mention that because Sentient felt very much like a combination of The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and An Immense World, keeping in mind that Sentient did come out before An Immense World. So, why don't we take a look at the names of each chapter to help give you an idea of what's in this book and maybe whether you'd be interested in reading it. Chapter 1, The Peacock Mantis Shrimp and Our Sense of Color. Chapter 2, The Spookfish and Our Dark Vision. Chapter 3, The Great Gray Owl and Our Sense of Hearing. Chapter 4, The Star-Nosed Mole and Our Sense of Touch. Chapter 5, The Common Vampire Bat and Our Sense of Pleasure and Pain. Chapter 6, The Goliath Catfish and Our Sense of Taste. Chapter 7, The Bloodhound and Our Sense of Smell. Chapter 8, The Giant Peacock of the Night and Our Sense of Desire, and that one's about pheromones. Chapter 9, The Cheetah and Our Sense of Balance. Chapter 10, The Trashline Orb Weaver and Our Sense of Time. Chapter 11, The Bar-tailed Godwit and Our Sense of Direction. Chapter 12, The Common Octopus and Our Sense of Body, and an afterword, The Duck-billed Platypus. So each chapter talks about the animal sense and talks about how humans use that particular sense. She talks about the normal biology and the circuitry involved in the human and the animal organs. She talks about human cases where you have people who have heightened function or lowered function because of neurological causes. In doing this, she brings into perspective where the normal wild type person fits into the scheme. There were a couple of main takeaways and themes in each of the chapters. First of First of all the human senses are actually pretty good, even when compared to some of the animals who are known for their super sensing abilities. Humans are pretty well equipped in each of the senses. It turns out that our detection thresholds for hearing, seeing, detecting touch, differentiating colors, or picking up a scent are remarkably acute. The book states that it is possible for a human to detect a single photon of light, and it's impossible to experience true silence with normal hearing parts because even in an anechoic chamber, you're going to adjust and you're going to be able to hear your blood pumping and even your nervous activity in your body. And if you ever get time to test this out, the book also says that for 45 minutes, your eyes will continue to adjust to dark conditions, and eventually you'll be able to see surprisingly well in the dark. Another theme that made multiple appearances, and I thought this was so cool, was the having two nostrils, eyes, and ears, and multiple other sense parts does so much more than just double your sense acuity, but it adds another dimension with which you can triangulate your position. That's stereoscopic smell or sight or hearing. And this is what allows the brain to draw a comparison from multiple reference frames at once to construct a much richer perception. This was my one problem with Ed Yong's An Immense World. They didn't really go into this. This book did, and it was so satisfying to have that elaborated on, even if it was just a little. This is especially interesting with sensing the passage of time, which most certainly is dependent upon brain function. The ability to construct a linear continuum by comparing multiple incoming and stored temporal reference frames is one of the things that humans can do better than any other animal. This could be one of the things responsible for the famous explosion of consciousness that I've seen so many books touch on. At some point in early evolution, life went from being things that could not move to things that could move, or went from one temporal dimension to two, where more complex life uses yet one more dimension. Could our current Homo sapiens brand state of awareness be because of a reason as simple as having evolved the neural structures to go from two temporal dimensional thinking to three? It's probably not as simple as that, but it's a lot of fun to think about things like this. But I'm kind of digressing here. The book doesn't really talk about that, but it comes close. What the book does say, though, and if you've read a lot of neurology books, you'll know that besides having two holes for gathering stimuli, many of our senses actually have two neural circuit pathways that the neural impulses travel down, and they control for slightly different functions. We know that these separate pathways have evolved at different times from each other, and it's a safe assumption that this conferred a significant survival advantage. We have learned that in the case of eyes, for example, just like gaining depth perception with two eyes, and there is a ventral and a dorsal pathway leading to the occipital lobe, providing for different interpretations of the sensory information, allowing us to construct rich perception. On top of that, we use multiple senses simultaneously to collect the information. This experience is most obvious with tasting and smelling something at the same time as you eat, or when you encode memories with powerful emotion enhanced sensory stimuli like baking cookies with grandma or the smell of your wife's sweat. They say emotion and memory are more closely linked with smell than any other sense because it's the only sense that goes straight to the amygdala without having to pass through the thalamus first. The multiple neural circuit pathways were discussed for other senses too, and stuff like this makes me think, what other kinds of things could be possible if we were built a little different? But then again, the normal phenotype for photoreceptors codes for trichromatic color vision, but the people with 4 rather than 3 color receptors didn't even know that they were different. It's just a matter of having an organ to collect the information and at the same time the neural structures with which to interpret the information. We're already at the point where we can design machines to help with this. The book mentions an apparatus designed to be able to see using the tongue, which I believe was talked about in this book, along with many other exciting examples. I also appreciate how this book makes it clear that things like taste and smell do not exist as objective realities, but are products that are constructed in the brain. As Paul Bach-y-Rita stated, we do not see with our eyes, we see with our brains. All of these neurological upshots and possibilities concerning perception are barely mentioned in the book, but if you're paying attention and you're an inquisitive type, this book will give you plenty of fascinating things to think about. If you're not, this book might just read like a standard animal documentary, which is still pretty cool. There are so many interesting things brought up in this book, like that catfish can use taste like we use smell. That is, they can taste things at a distance. And speaking of distance, from 100 feet away, using only hearing, a great gray owl can locate a mouse that is hiding underneath the snow, and then it can dive onto it without making a sound and locate and catch the mouse with precision. Or when discussing the star-nosed mole's brain scans, talking about how a star-nosed mole's star on its face is more like an eye that sees rather than a hand that feels. They bring up how a blind person can co opt parts of their occipital lobe for touch sense processing and scenery building. They say that rather than strictly being thought of as for processing sight, the occipital lobe can be thought of as a place to discriminate spatial relationships, and it will use any appropriate sense to do this. That's just one other example of the kind of points raised in this book. Sentient does the thing that I think every really good science book should do, and that's deliver plenty of good information that, besides just being science, is going to make you stop and think and ask questions and consider more closely or in new ways the relationships that happen in nature. This book shows why I think it's so fascinating to study the brain and evolution. This book will do that if you're paying attention. And of course, it's got references, notes, and an index. Okay, guys, that's it for this one. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any interest in nature, animals, sensation and perception, the brain, or evolution, or how you function, you'll want to check out Sentient by Jackie Higgins.